DAS Talk by Gamma, keeping you connected and protected.
Welcome to DAS Talk, the essential podcast on distributed antenna systems and in-building communication. Hosted by Peter, VP of Gamma, and Philip Nicholas. This Gamma Electronics series focuses on emergency response and safety. Join us as we navigate the challenges of building effective communication systems for North America's first responders. We delve into the advancements in emergency responder radio systems and the transformative impact on new technologies. Tune in for insightful discussions aimed at increasing knowledge and awareness in the DAS field. Whether you're a professional or an enthusiast, DAS Talk is your gateway to understanding the nexus of technology, safety, and communication.
Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of DAS Talk. I'm excited to be with you as always. It's very different and very unique on today's episode. So I'm going to present to you my presentation that I gave just a few hours ago at IWCE. So I'm Peter Wehretter. I'm the co-founder of Gamma. I'm also the vice president. I host this amazing podcast. And I've got 20 years of manufacturing experience with RF connectors. Now I'd like to tell you guys just a little bit about me. I've never actually really done that on this show. So I grew up in Amityville, New York. That's the high school I attended. I was born and I was raised in the town right next door called Massapequa. So Amityville High School was where I graduated from. And the Amityville Horror House, which you can see there's a picture right here, was a few-minute walk from my high school. Now, many of you may have heard of the movie Jaws. Jaws was filmed at Amityville Beach. So growing up in Amityville, I fished and crabbed during the summer, and then during the winter, I froze to death. Now, other than that, it was a great upbringing on Long Island. Now, when I was a teenager, late teenager, I decided to move to California when I was 19. And I attended college. I graduated from California State University, Los Angeles. I graduated cum laude. My first job out of college, I worked for a wire manufacturer. We did wire, cable, all sorts of other components like that, cable protection. And then in 2006, I co-founded Gamma. And at Gamma, you know, it's always been an awesome experience to manufacture, design, and produce RF components that keep us safe inside. That's basically what we do there in a nutshell. Now, later on in life, I met my lovely wife, and I got married, and we had 4 children. So I've got 2 children in high school. I've got 1 child in elementary school, and I got 1 child attending college. Now, the two of my children, they attend a school called Diamond Ranch. Now, Diamond Ranch High School is up on a hill. It's nearby, probably a 5-minute drive from my house. Now, this is a great school. It was took about $43 million to build it, and it was built in 1997. So this is one of the coolest campuses, as you can tell. You take a look at some of the retro designs of the school, really, really kind of neat. In fact, it was awarded 8 different architectural design awards for how neat and how cool it was. So you go into campus and immediately you notice these kind of weird buildings, but there's metal everywhere you see all over this campus. I'll show you another slide here. This is another pic of the campus. Really kind of a cool place to go to school. My kids really, really enjoy going there. However, you know, I've noticed when my kids were attending there that their cell phones never worked. You go past the gym into any other areas on campus or into the back rooms, and they can't even get a text message out in this place. So, you know, I think from a parent's perspective, it's a little troubling sometimes when you can't communicate with your child, particularly at school. So I have a couple of stories I wanted to share with you about this. Now, the first one being about my friend Michelle, who had 2 children who attended this school several years ago, and there was what we call as like a tarp fire in the back. So there were some kids who had lit some fireworks in the back during school time, and the fireworks went off and it lit a tarp that was hanging over the fence on fire. You can actually kind of see in the back field there. So then the fire crept up the hill and lit the whole hill on fire. Immediately, first responders were called out. Some of my her daughter's friends were actually out in front of the school and were able to call 911 and got the fire department at the school. Well, they kind of shut down entrance and everyone from leaving and coming into the school in order to put the fire out. They didn't want traffic coming in and out. So that said, what was troublesome about this incident was the fact that my friend Michelle could not communicate with any of her children while they were on campus. That was a little disturbing. Now, this is an incident that happened with me and my kids. So probably a few months ago at the school, we heard this report online that came up, posted on social media. There was a gun on campus. And turns out there was a gun on campus. All we heard is a really brief message. And the message was like, there's security, a gun. We weren't really sure what happened, right? There wasn't a lot of information. What do you know? I couldn't text any of my kids. I couldn't call any of my kids. I didn't know what was going on. We pretty much had to wait until they got out of school in order to find out exactly what happened. And so what ended up happening was that there was a kid from another school showed up to the school. He got into a fight with one of the kids at school and he brandished a gun at the school. And then he hopped in his car with his buddies and they took off and went to who knows where at the time. So that was a little troublesome and gave, as mom and dad, us some anxiety because, well, all you hear is there's a gun on campus. You don't know if there are shots fired. You really don't know what's going on. You don't know if your kid's safe. It's really, really concerning. So we're going to jump back into my school. You'll see it later on. I'll talk more about it. So I have a question for you. My question is, are we doing everything as a society to keep our children safe? Do we really care about that on a significant level? Is it a high priority for us? Well, there's a term, you put your money where your mouth is. And I really do believe in that term because I'm going to show you some numbers that are kind of mind-blowing when it comes to funding in school and safety. So let's jump into this. So per the Brookings Institute, only 10% of public school spending is on infrastructure. The other 90% is probably done on, staffing. I probably guessed that. I'm not going to jump into those numbers. 80% of that comes from local taxes. So why this is so significant is when you go to a school, let's just say in Beverly Hills, or a school in a more downtrodden, dumpy city, you're going to have a significant difference between those two schools. And I think for me personally, it's a little frustrating because that means that local taxes are funding the poor schools and local taxes are also funding the rich schools. And then you have a beautiful school and a crappy school, and it's different based upon the income levels of those regions. So to dive more into these numbers, 35% or 1/3 of it is on new construction. Okay, so that means they're building, that's where all that money's coming from. Another third is done on renovation and modernization. 25% is on maintenance and operations. 10 to 15% is on this column, and there's 3 different parts of this column, is on technology, and that includes classroom tech, science labs, and the third on the list is security systems and surveillance upgrades. So what does that really mean? This means 2.5 to 5% of the total infrastructure spending nationwide is dedicated to security and surveillance. Now, out of that security and surveillance, let's break those numbers down a little bit more. All right. So out of that, 1/3 up to 40% is done on surveillance systems. 20 to 30% is on access control systems. Emergency communication, which is what I'm going to focus on in just a minute here, is only 15 to 20%. And security personnel equipment is 10 to 15%. So out of all these numbers, you break it all down, how much of that budget are we spending on schools? Or should I say emergency communications at schools? Only 0.05 to 0.015% is dedicated to emergency communications. When I dove down to these numbers, it was actually one of my coworkers, Gil Martinez. He said, you know what? I had a much broader number, the 10%. And he said, I want to know what's in that 10%. So I took the time to go ahead and dive into these numbers. And after I did, I was blown away by what we actually spend on this portion of this, which is emergency communications. So when we underfund communications, I ask you, what happens when we do that? So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a couple of different incidences, or should I say tragedies that happened in the history of the United States. So the first one happened in 2018, and this was the Parkland shooting in 2018. Now, I had the opportunity to do an interview with Lori Alhadeff. She's the mother of one of the daughters of the victims who was shot during the Parkland shooting in 2018. So we're going to just watch this video here.
Yeah, because one of the things I looked into this story and I was reading up onto the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas incident. Of course, I probably don't have as much information as you have, but I was able to pull at least from a few different stories of a little bit of the timeline. And as you know, an instance like this, or any kind of emergency for that matter, time saves lives. The time that emergency responders can get in and either nullify or remove the threat, or they can save or get to that person who might be injured, whether it's like a heart attack or whether it's a school shooting or whatever it may be. That time is critical because it can save people's lives, right? So, but from what I've seen about this and what I've noticed, there was some problems with getting into the building, and this isn't just a new thread. This is kind of a consistent thread. So there were multiple different law enforcement who were trying to communicate through their radios, and they were getting sort of what they call as a dead signal or a busy signal, I guess you could say, and they couldn't communicate with that. Was there a delay that was going on before law enforcement came in and EMS could get in, and what happened there? Or what do you know about that?
Yeah, so a few things. So one is, you're correct. The radios were like bricks. They didn't work. And then also our camera system, when law enforcement went in there, for whatever reason, the camera system was on like a 20, 30-minute delay. So what they were looking at was delayed. So it wasn't real time. So that was a huge problem. And then the other problem that we did have a school resource officer, but so supposedly he didn't know where the sound of gunfire was coming from, and he froze. And he was the only person at the time that had a gun that would have been able to go in and take down the threat. So that delay of action, the delay of somebody responding faster or going to the gunfire, right, going to the threat, was cost 17 lives that horrific day. And if they had the panic button, there was a guy on the golf cart that saw the shooter walk in the school with a gun bag. And if he pushed his panic button, then law enforcement could have immediately got eyes, pulled up the cameras within the school and see that there's some kid with a gun bag, right, that has a gun. And there would have been that time period would have been faster for help to get there, right? There would have been no question of, wait, is there a school shooting? Do I hear gunfire? Where is it coming from, right? And all of that, combined caused the failures that occurred that day, and the response to be so delayed.
Okay, so a little bit more about this incident. I'm going to go through the timeline here, and then I'm going to talk about this incident. So let's look at this. So at 2:19, the perpetrator gets dropped off by an Uber. 2:21, he entered building 12 through an unlocked door. One of my pet peeves, unlocked doors. I don't like them. 2:22 through 2:27, he activated the fire alarm to cause chaos and began shooting. 2:27, he discarded his rifle, vest, and fled with panicking students. Okay, 2:32, first officers entered the building. At 3 p.m., the buildings were cleared for EMT or medics to come to the building. So a few notes I wanted to bring up about this. Number one, Lori brought up that the radios were like bricks. All right, that's obviously troublesome. The other issue that really came up here was other officers who arrived at the scene also reported that their radios were not working from local news agencies. Okay, there was a 20-minute delay in the camera system. So what they were looking at was not live camera, and they thought they were looking at live camera. That was also a delay. So by the time medics actually got into the building, all right, at 2:50 p.m., I believe, yes. So 2:50 p.m., they were cleared. Medics were in the building at 2:50. At that time, the perpetrator was already at a local Walmart eating a Subway sandwich. All right, so that's kind of troubling. So let's look at the key takeaways from this incident, right? So 14 students and 3 teachers were murdered. From the time the perpetrator left the building, it took 33 minutes for medics to enter the building. First responders tried using their radios but got busy signals. Indoor coverage, dead spots, and poor coverage contributed to first responder confusion delays. Victims bled out waiting for medics to enter the school. Parkland is a wealthy area, and this is also significant too. So it's not just like in underfunded, poor areas where infrastructure isn't funded. It's in rich areas as well where we run into these issues. Okay, so as unfortunately students bled out, and things obviously could have been handled better. Now, I would never put 100% blame on radio systems causing this incident. Never, 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 right? The perpetrator is the one who did it. They take the blame for the incident. However, the lack of radio communication contributed to the chaos. I would never say that, there's always something to say that this could have gone better. I want to jump into another incident here. It's the Uvalde shooting. Okay, timeline. Here's the timeline on the Uvalde shooting on May 24th of 2022. So an 18-year-old gunman, he entered Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, and carried out one of the deadliest shootings in history. 19 children, 2 teachers lost their lives that day. But what makes this a tragedy even more devastating is that many lives could have been saved if only first responders had been able to communicate effectively. So let's look at this timeline. 11:31, the shooter enters the school perimeter. 911s were called. So in this instance, people were able to call 911 out of the building. However, in the Parkland incident, there were reports that 911 could not be called, and even teachers inside the buildings were not able to call out. So there's a difference between these two different shootings. Okay, 11:33 a.m., school shooters enter Robb Elementary again through an unlocked door. 11:35, 3 policemen arrive and take cover and don't engage with the shooter. All right, Chloe Torres, a 10-year-old, called 911 4 times. This one is the one that hurts the most, okay? She called at 12:03, 12:10, 12:13, and 12:16. And unfortunately, her calls took a significant amount of time to ever get answered. However, the information that she did give to the 911 call dispatcher did actually help first responders to nullify the threat. So 12:50 p.m., Bortec agents breach the classroom door and kill the shooter. So the failure of our first responder radios wasn't just a glitch that happened that day. It was a systemic failure. It was not the first time emergency communication systems failed. We think back to Katrina. We think back to 911, which is kind of where a lot of this originated at. The ERCES or radio systems that resolve this. So we've really got to invest in technology that works. We need to invest in training where we can train our staff and train our first responders to interact and respond to these systems better, or to these emergencies better. So the Uvalde tragedy was really a painful reminder that communication failures in a crisis can be just as deadly as the threat itself. All right, when first responder radio coverage fails, we have failed our students, we've failed our teachers, our staff. Other than Columbine, Parkland, and Uvalde, Virginia Tech and Sandy Hook also come to mind with first responder radio failures. Now, I wanted to jump into a little bit of the cause of signal failures and what's taking place here. So first of all, law enforcement radios didn't work inside buildings. Critical information about the emergency didn't get communicated, including the perpetrator and victim whereabouts. Radio coverage was so bad that officers needed to step outside to communicate. There was a report that one of the captains took his radio and threw it up against the fence because communication was so bad. For 77 minutes, officers waited in the hallway without confronting the perpetrator inside. 19 children, 2 teachers were murdered that day. So, what's the cause of the signal dead zones in schools and buildings? Okay, so first, it has a lot to do with where the tower is located. All right, so, I think I'd like to think about cell phones. Okay, when you're on your cell phone and you're driving through a valley or you're driving kind of in a remote area, you have trouble getting signal. So RF is RF. It applies to first responder radios the same way it applies to your cell phone. So when you go down into a subterranean parking lot underneath a building, or you go into a weird spot on school campus, you're going to have problems getting signal coverage, and it can be due to water, it can be due to morphology, it can be due to multiple different reasons as to where that tower is and to relation to where your cell phone is. Now, the same thing applies to first responder radios and their macro network is what we say, okay? So it also has to do with the building materials. It has to do with what the buildings are manufactured or built from. More concrete, more steel, low E glass, brick, all these things attenuate or stop signal, and sometimes it just bounces right off. Okay, so we take those, that's what creates these dead zones. Now, the good thing is we understand what's creating the dead zones. There's some good news, and technology has resolved it. So if you can remember Diamond Ranch High School, all right, Diamond Ranch High School is literally an RF nightmare. There is no signal throughout this whole thing. And if you look back to these buildings, there's tons of metal all over these buildings. RF does not penetrate it at all. So it is a RF dead zone nightmare. So what we call as an emergency responder communication enhancement system, this is what is designed to fix the first responder problem. So you've got first responder communications and you've got cellular communication. So I want to break these down into two different types of systems, right? So the ERCES is basically an amplifier with cable and connectors and antennas, and they're deployed inside buildings, and it's dedicated to an emergency responder communication so that they can communicate in buildings. And then you have a cellular system, which is very similar. It has a base station, it has antennas. It also has an amplifying system. It also has antennas deployed through the buildings in order to take that signal and then spread it throughout the building. Now, there are some significant differences. One of the differences might be the signal source on the DAS system or the cellular DAS system versus the ERCES system. However, wherever you can, it's highly recommended that you commingle these systems, because if you can use the same or similar infrastructure to build these systems out, you can save yourself some money. All right, so let's talk some numbers here real quick. So 130,000 schools with 50 million students. 60% of first-time responders report radio signal failures inside school buildings during emergencies. More than 70% of schools lack a dedicated ERCES. Approximately 52% of schools fail NFPA and IFC coverage requirements. And to complicate things, more than 50% of schools have poor cellular coverage. Now, some of these statistics are a little difficult to get because a lot of these schools have not been tested. So we don't really know. These are some statistics based upon what first responders report and what individuals report when they're attending and going to these schools. So even the government recognizes we've got a problem. So typically how things work is technology comes first and they will resolve a societal problem, and then government comes after that. So government has come in and they've written plenty of codes and standards in order to help dictate what kind of coverage we need to get. So the technology resolved the problem. Now the code will tell you, well, where it needs to be done. So you've got NFPA 1225, you've got NFPA 72, you've got NFPA 1221, and you've got IFC code 510 is another one. Now, however, there is a big caveat in this whole thing, because even though there's national code and standards that say you need to have coverage inside schools, a lot of states have not necessarily adopted it, and if they have adopted it, it's sort of a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis, which means one county could actually be enforcing it and one county may not be. And this is only for first responders. This isn't even for cellular coverage. Okay, so when we go into first responders, from what I can see, 41 out of 50 states adopted IF 510 or NFPA codes that require coverage. All right. If you're in Connecticut, Texas, Illinois, New Mexico, Minnesota, Colorado, Idaho, North Dakota, or South Dakota, and guess what? They haven't adopted anything. So maybe they're listening to this presentation today and they will, someone, will adopt the code. I don't know. We'll see. So what does the code actually say? In order to understand what the code says, I'm going to sort of identify two terms. So one is a dBm, and this is a decibel per milliwatt, or signal strength. The other one is DAQ, and this means delivered audio quality, or signal clarity, or sound clarity. Okay, so the first one is all new schools, and in many jurisdictions, existing schools must have approved radio coverage for emergency responders throughout the building, based on the jurisdiction's public safety radio system. Okay, number two, if the coverage is inadequate, emergency responder communication enhancement systems must be installed. Three, according to IFC 510.4, the radio system must meet a minimum signal strength of negative 95 dBm in critical areas and 99% coverage. At 99% coverage. A minimum signal strength in general areas must be a negative 95 dBm with a 95% coverage. NFPA 1225 requires an audio quality test with a minimum standard of DAQ to be 3.0. So real quick, I'll jump into critical areas versus like general areas. Critical areas means where first responders are going to go in and they're going to be staging their mission critical activities, right? So like a lobby, staircases, elevators, those are going to be critical areas around the building. General areas are going to be like your hallways, your classrooms, any other parts of the building, just general areas where everyone else goes. It's ironic that where you think you would need coverage where you wouldn't on a cellular system is different than on a emergency responder system. And we already talked about DAQ means delivered audio quality, which means the signal clarity needs to be 3.0. So Houston, and here's the thing, is not only do we have a coverage problem in the United States, we also have what I call an interoperability problem. So this basically means this kind of was really came to fruition during the Columbine incident. So during the Columbine incident, we had multiple different agencies that could not communicate because the radio systems were not bridged together. They could not speak. SWAT would show up and SWAT couldn't talk with law enforcement. Fire department couldn't talk with SWAT and so on. And this became a problem because when you're trying to coordinate a large group effort, trying to resolve the problem becomes very, very difficult. So what I've looked into in this process is actually interoperability is a big, big concern and a big, big concern for first responders. So a 2018 study indicated 200 first responders across 13 states highlighting the importance of effective communications and interoperability in an emergency response, right? So when they can't communicate, that's a big problem. So if more than 50% of schools don't even have coverage, appropriate coverage, I can't imagine what the interoperability problem exists between school staff and first responders. Because if first responders show up and they're trying to coordinate like an evacuation or contact any school resource officers on campus, how are they going to be able to do that if there's no data as to whether this exists or not? Or in other words, there's no data of having them. So we really have no idea on how bad this problem is. Okay, but I can attest to you, it's not even being talked about. So there's no solid data on this, but this is undoubtedly a big problem because it's a coordination problem between first responders and between schools. So Houston, we have a big education and training problem. So, in my experience in manufacturing RF components, and doing this podcast, DashTalk.com, I've had the opportunity to discuss with many industry leaders about how to resolve these problems and what we've got. So I've really come to the conclusion that training and understanding and education is where we have a widespread issue in this industry. So whether you're a school official who dictates where funding is going to be and whether it's going to be on radio communications, whether you're an authority having jurisdiction who dictates whether or not you're going to enforce radio in-building code for first responders, or whoever you may be, if you're a public official who also dictates policy on this issue, we really need to educate people and help them understand this. So I decided that it would be really, really important that we kind of resolve this training deficit. And so what I did is I built something pretty cool. So in order to bridge the educational and training coverage gap, I built the solution to the problem. So what is the solution? Welcome to Dash University. So the mission of Dash University is to bridge the coverage gap of knowledge and building safety through in-building radio communications. Every school official, integrator, code official, architect, builder, and certified, we want them certified, trained to maintain and install mission-critical communication systems. That's our vision. So what is DAS University? DAS University is a comprehensive online and on-demand platform that teaches how to enforce and build mission-critical radio communication systems. Who needs to enroll in DAS University? School officials who make decisions about in-building radio, authorities having jurisdiction, fire marshals, fire inspectors, plan checkers, and code officials, architects who design school campuses and high-rises and other large buildings, apartment buildings, developers and building owners, general contractors who build multifamily dwelling residents, high-rises, apartment buildings, and school buildings, integrators and technicians who are installing the networks. So what's in the coursework? What does it cover? So introduction to DAS and ERCES. Learn the fundamentals about what a distributed antenna system is and what an emergency responder communication enhancement system is. Learn all about the code. I tell you, the code can be a real nightmare. Okay, digging into this code and learning about what code in what state and what jurisdiction is really, really difficult. It really is our hope that more people take this serious so that they can be code compliant and code a little bit more code savvy when it comes to this. There's also a liability factor that comes into this. If your state has adopted code and you're not enforcing it in your school, you should be concerned about that. So RF signal propagation interference, right? Understand how signal bounces off walls, like a basketball in certain instances, or bounces off some of that, what we call as low E glass on the outside of buildings. Sometimes you could just shut a door and you get no signal inside the building. I mean, it's kind of scary sometimes. So a DAS BDA installation and maintenance. This is also taught in our courses. So fire inspector, plan checker, and AHJ training. Learn how to conduct code compliance inspections for public safety DAS and ERCES systems for fire officials. Now, here's a big one. So we've got to kill those dead zones. We got to find them in the first place, right? So if we don't find them, we can't kill them. So we're going to teach you how to find those dead zones. So you can use it. You can do an RF survey, identify the dead zones, and optimize in-building radio coverage. That's really critical. So I'm going to do a recap right here. So let's look at the challenges in the industry, right? So the number one is that there are dead zones on school campuses and in buildings. First responder radios don't work, and students or staff can't call 911. Solution: DAS University teaches best practices for DAS and ERCES installation, maintenance and grid testing to find those dead zones. Number two, code enforcement and school officials have little time to take in-person classes about interoperability and ERCES. DAS University courses are available through online modules, so you can take the classes anytime at anywhere. Number three, school professionals and fire code officials lack knowledge about campus coverage and code enforcement. So DAS University offers ICC and NFPA certifications that teach school officials and code enforcers proper code enforcement and good on-campus radio coverage. So the final one, here's the kicker of the whole thing. Underfunded school communication systems. We already ran through those numbers. And this maybe one day this will change, we'll see. Okay, educate our representatives about DAS and spend 3.25% of 1 year's annual budget, and you can install a DAS or distributed antenna system in every single school in the United States. That's not a big number, okay? But it's much bigger than what we're spending right now. So that's my prayer, my hope that we can do that. So I really highly recommend you join DAS University, get ERCES Level 1 certified, and thank you for joining me today in today's special DAS Talk. Thanks.
DAS Talk by Gamma, keeping you connected and protected.